Hello, Ileana. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Osta. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. We're finally doing this.
Yeah, it took a while for us to get to this point.
Yep.
With life getting in the way. But can you let's start off with pretty much like you telling more about yourself. What do you do? Maybe even like how did you get into that?
Yeah, so I am co-founder along with my business partner, Eva Baltova. We have a company that works with progressive organizations, and we go in and we talk to we have a program. It's a training and coaching program, and we target their female employees who are not on the management track or leadership track, because we feel that most women have untapped potential. They don't really have the tools to find it. And because of a lot of negative conditioning that many men and women are subjected to, often they're too self-critical and they're afraid of failure. So they keep themselves small. So we go in and we have 3 courses. We teach them about self-confidence, boundaries, and communications. And the whole idea is to change mindset and to change behavior. So once you change your mindset about yourself and your place in the world, your behavior automatically starts to change. So we're very excited about doing that. And how I got into it, I've always been like a big believer that women are not given their full rights, even in the West. So even though we are the most advanced in all the globe as far as treating women is concerned, women are still not paid as much as men are, of course. And there's still this underlying kind of sexism that sometimes happens. That is again, because of the conditioning that we receive. So I really became aware of that when I went to work in a Muslim country that was very restrictive and very conservative. And that's when I realized I was actually a feminist. And when I came back, this was at the back of my mind. How can I help women kind of wake up to themselves, to wake up to their abilities and their talents and their gifts? And then it just kind of went from there. The opportunity showed up and we just went for it. So, yeah.
So many things to unpack.
Yeah, right.
The good thing is that we have time to do that.
Yes.
So you said that you help women to kind of wake up to their abilities. What are the things that maybe have, like, you kind of touched on that, but going a bit deeper, like what are things that have made us kind of asleep or not to see those things?
Yeah. So since we're children, especially little girls, are very conditioned to please others. Now, obviously, some cultures are more into that, and some families have stronger beliefs around that. But most little girls are conditioned since they're young to really pay attention, first of all, to their physical appearance. So physical beauty is really emphasized. And then it's this thing about really pleasing others. So there's a message that gets passed on, sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly, that the job of women is to please men and to please other people, and that their needs are kind of last. And so what ends up happening is you have grown adult women who kind of don't know who they are. They're just in a situation where they're putting themselves last and often doing things they don't want to be doing because they're afraid of rejection, and they're afraid of being judged, and they're afraid of failure. And there's this whole thing that happens, and then they just hold back. So, for example, in a business situation, you'll have people in meetings, and somebody, a woman has an idea, and she's thinking, I want to put this in chat. And then they think to themselves, yeah, but probably everybody knows this, and I'll just make a fool of myself. And they don't put it. And then 2 minutes later, somebody else does and gets a lot of applause and gets a lot of satisfaction out of it. So women hold themselves back when they could actually really contribute and shine. And for me, it's all about shining your light to the world, right? If we all play small, nothing's going to happen. If we want to change this world and make it more egalitarian, which is my big mission, to have women, sorry,
what does
egalitarian, to be equal.
Okay, got it.
So we have the same opportunities, we have the same rights, we have absolutely everything is the same. It doesn't mean we're the same as men, because of course that's not possible, because we bring different things to the table. But if we all cooperated and collaborated together in an equal manner, I think this world would be vastly changed. And if we're going to play small, it's not going to happen. So making your voice heard, and this is something big that we talk about, is making your voice heard, and like contributing to meetings and just speaking your truth, and not being so afraid of being wrong, of being judged, of being perfect. Perfectionism is this other horrible thing that women have, this thing that they have to be perfect before they speak, or perfect hostess, or perfect wife, or perfect mother, or perfect, so there's huge judgment. And when you judge yourself really harshly, that stops you from doing things because you're so scared.
Even like as you were talking about thinking bigger, and even kind of making your voice heard, that's already kind of starting to think bigger. And I think what I have noticed a lot is that a lot of times, probably especially for women, when you start to even think about going in that direction, there comes a lot of guilt with that, or there comes a lot of like maybe even shame, like
who am I to do this, right? What gives me the right?
Or feel just that, who am I? Or there's another thing that I had in my mind, but really there's that guilt around it, like getting or taking up space. What you kind of touched on, where is it coming from, but how can somebody, let's say there's a woman who wants to take up more space and they know they have a lot of potential, what are the things that she can do to help her to do that? Or maybe even, I don't think you can like instantly get rid of the guilt, but deal with that guilt better initially.
Well, she needs to take our course, of course. So sometimes these things go really deep, and it's very difficult to become aware of them. It's difficult to become aware that we're even held back, because if you think of the analogy of a fish that's swimming in water, does it know that it's swimming in water? Probably not, because that's its natural environment. So if you're always used to thinking in this way, and if you're always this is your mindset, it's very difficult to see what is going on. This is kind of robotic, and this is how you've always been. So my advice to anyone like this is to embark on a self-growth program. So this is what we teach. We teach self-growth and self-development. So basically taking yourself from here to there. Not that there's anything intrinsically wrong with where you are right now, but holding yourself back and not allowing your gifts to really flourish and your capabilities really actually is detrimental to the world. One of the things we do in our confidence course is we talk about some female leaders that have changed the world, and how they thought, and how different things would be if they didn't do those things. And most of them went against the grain. They went against society. They went against expectations, and they just did what they felt was right. And these are like, I have like a global group of women that I talk about to show that it's kind of possible anywhere. So it's becoming aware is the very first thing. Self-awareness is the number one thing that needs to happen. And to do that, you have to start to ask yourself some questions. So this is what we do in the program. We have certain exercises and assignments that we ask our participants to do. And this requires quiet time, and it requires to go inside. And there's a lot of fear around this. A lot of people have fear around doing this work, because depending on how deep the conditioning was, or if there was abuse, people have buried things. So they're kind of afraid to open them up. So sometimes it helps to have a coach, or to have a therapist to work with, or to have somebody who can provide some sort of guidance from the outside, because it's difficult to do it on your own. Now, there are women who don't need this, who are very strong, and who they may have had strong role models, and who already know that they need to do something else. So they're kind of like the lucky ones, because their conditioning and their family was a little bit different. They didn't have all of that stuff. Certain cultures are definitely much more oppressive than other cultures. So to give you an example, my mother was a judge and a lawyer. And she never gave me the message that, you know, my role was just to be at home and that I couldn't do anything or something because I was a woman. So I never received that messaging. And so that never actually stopped me. We had some disagreements about the role of the woman in the relationship and so on, because my views are much more liberal.
Mhm.
She was a different generation. But as far as what I could accomplish on my own, I never got the negative messaging that I couldn't because I was a woman and that was not my place. So I was one of the lucky ones. And there are women, normally they end up in leadership or management roles very quickly, and they're the minority. It's these other women that have kind of been neglected that we're trying to foster and take along and show them that, you know, even if they don't go into management and leadership, but they feel differently about themselves and they approach the world differently. You know, when you have self-assurance and you're not so afraid of how you're going to be judged and viewed, you approach the world differently, and what you give is really a lot more authentic, right?
Yeah. And I think another thing that has been really helpful even for me was because I would do a lot of I would watch like a lot of interviews with successful people, both
Yes.
men and women. But one thing that has been really, really helpful for me was just networking, just talking to people where you see that person literally sitting across from you and they tell about their mindset, how they think, which for them, it's just their normal reality.
Right.
And when you kind of receive that, or you start to think about, okay, this person across of me is just a person, and you start to maybe even question some of your reality and thinking, okay, this has been true for me my whole life, but is it really true? Because for them, it's not. Like you said about your mom, like somebody else who their role model, or let's say their mom might have given them impression that you have to stay in your place,
Exactly.
And then when I talk to somebody like yourself, they might be like, oh, maybe it's not that I have to be that, which I would even say that it's okay if that's something you want to do, where let's say you're stay-at-home mom, things like that.
Of course.
My mom is
as
like
long
that,
as it's
which is
your choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's I think is another thing that a lot of times women get kind of judgment about, is that, oh, you're just like staying at home, you're not doing anything, and things like that, which initially I would feel the same way about my mom. I would be like, you're not really doing anything. But then years later, I'm like, oh, it takes so much work.
The hardest job in the world, right? To be a good
Exactly.
mom.
But it's something that I think a lot of times because of the money coming in the world, that's where we start to kind of measure how worth is one, I don't want to say profession, but like one thing you do compared to something else.
For sure.
So how do you what do you think this like money coming in society has played role in maybe how we see the importance of certain like professions or even gender roles? Yeah, we can just start there.
Yeah, I do think that money plays a huge role. And unfortunately, the people we reward are not the people we should be rewarding, as far as I'm concerned. You know, so early childhood education teachers who take care of little toddlers, teachers, nurses, these are people who should be paid a lot of money, because they're actually bringing along the next generation. And as far as nurses are concerned, you can't operate a hospital without a nurse. Instead, we pay athletes and celebrities enormous amounts of money to entertain us. So that really shows you where our values are. You know, our values as a society are not as far as, you know, bringing up children in a particular way and making sure they're healthy and well taken care of, which are huge responsible jobs. This is where we should be paying the big money. Instead, you know, we just want to be entertained.
Yeah, I think now a lot of times money goes where attention is.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of push from the media to, you know, entertain you so that you don't really think about deeper things, right? Because instead of reading books that make you think, you're just going to watch a football game or you're going to watch some mindless dribble. because, then you're just kept in check. So unfortunately, a lot of people fall into that category. And, for me, you and I have talked about this, reading important spiritual books, and even like books that make you think, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the most,
I literally have it here.
right? It's one of the most important books of our times. And it changes your mindset, but a lot of people don't even know about it. So there's so much we can do to actually help ourselves, educate ourselves, and rise above, the conditions that we were brought up with, and the ideas and the expectations. And I also find that sometimes even women who are highly educated don't have the confidence and don't have the strength to actually break out of the convention. So it really does take personal strength, and I think also community. So this is one of the things we do in our program, is we really foster the idea of women collaborating together and forming a community together, as opposed to competing with each other, which is something else that social media really encourages us to do. As soon as, you reach the age that you can take a selfie, you're on Instagram taking selfies of yourself and comparing yourself to your friends. I mean, this is so damaging. This is so damaging. And it's little girls and it's women of all ages, girls who compare themselves to photoshopped pictures of, models and all sorts of things like this. Men don't get that kind of pressure. Men don't get that kind of, it's almost like being in a pressure cooker. They have other things. So for example, if you have a job ad, a woman looks at a job ad and looks at the requirements. And if she has 100% of the criteria, she'll apply. Otherwise, she won't. A man, it's 60%. So that really tells you how differently men and women think about things. So women are a lot more conditioned to follow rules. And, it says, it says all this, I don't have all this, so I'm not gonna try. Whereas the man's like, well, I got some of it, I don't have some of it, but I'll give it a shot. So it's a very different way of thinking about yourself in the world. And really, what do you have to lose by giving it a shot? But most women don't think like that, which is the unfortunate part.
So why do women struggle to take more risks, or even like applying to jobs? Because what it is pretty much like putting yourself in a situation where you could potentially be rejected, which is kind of risky.
Yes.
So like, why is it that we, or let's say majority of women struggle to take those risks? I kind of have an idea why, but I'd want to hear your opinion on that.
There's a huge fear of failure.
Okay.
There's a huge thing about failing, which goes along with the whole idea of being perfect. So perfectionism is very widespread with women, and it shows up in everything that they do. And one of the things that they cannot handle is rejection and failing, right? So if you apply for a job that you don't get, there's both in there, right? You feel like you failed because you didn't get the job and you got rejected. So I'm just not going to bother. And the taking of risk, especially if you're not used to it. So this is what some of the work we do with our participants. We encourage them to take small, calculated risks until they start to grow in their confidence. And then you can take bigger risks. We say it's like a muscle, right? It's a muscle that needs exercising. And, I have to tell you, I was very risk averse when I was young. I was really scared. A failure was not an option. And I have no idea where I got that message from. I don't remember ever hearing my parents say anything like that to me, but I somehow got it in my brain that I couldn't fail. And it took me some time to get past this, but I eventually did. And now I take really big risks all the time. And it's because I know that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. This is the thing. It's having that self-assurance that you're going to be able to handle whatever comes your way. Because that's the thing, it's the unknown, right? It's the unknown, and you're not sure how you're going to perform. And if you have low self-worth, you really don't want to add to that by failing at something, right? So that would add to the low self-worth. It's very complex, actually, what happens with women. It's not just one thing. It's a complex mesh of many things together that happen. And again, a lot of it depends on culture and the family that you were raised in. So there are women who are raised in a family of academics, for example.
Yeah.
And it's expected of them that they're going to go into academia. So even if they have no interest in that, they're often pushed into that because that's what's expected. I know a lot of men go through that too, of course. But, if having the strength to stand up and say, no, I'm not actually interested in that, I want to do something else, and disappointing the family, this disappointment, this fear of rejection, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for women to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. And even as you were speaking about taking risks, what role does confidence play in that? Because a lot of times when it comes to coming risks, it's not as much about, I think, potential failure or rejection, but it's about your confidence in your ability to deal with that when it happens. So a lot of times we don't take those risks because we are not really sure that we can deal with the potential downside of that decision.
Exactly. So courage is essential. Courage is essential to build self-confidence because you have to start taking action. If you never take action, you're never going to step out of your comfort zone. And we were talking about that earlier. And nothing new will happen in your life. You're still gonna be in that rut. So you need to have courage, and you need to understand that there's no failure, because even if what you're trying to do doesn't work out, you've still learned something. And that's invaluable. And usually, unfortunately, people learn the most from things that don't work out. We learn the most from painful, difficult experiences. But those are so invaluable. In one of my other incarnations in my past life, I used to have a marketing company, and I used to work with small entrepreneurs who were mostly holistic practitioners or coaches, because I realized that I loved the work that they did and I really believed in it, but they had no idea how to market themselves. So that's what I was doing. I was helping them market themselves. And I also got involved with an organization that was teaching people how to start their own business. So I used to do this training program, 30-hour training program with all these people who wanted to start their own business. And I used to read to them a motivational story at the end of every class about, some businessman, very successful person. And often they went bankrupt. Sometimes these people ended up on the street. That's how low they went. But then they came back up because intrinsically they had what it takes. So just because something doesn't work out, or it works out in a different way, it didn't affect their self-worth.
Yeah.
And it didn't
define them.
Exactly. And it didn't stop them from moving forward. They looked at it as, what can I learn from this? So that next time it's more refined and I don't make that same mistake. That's the attitude to have. There's no failure. There's only, lessons to be learned.
Yeah. And I also want to add, for anybody who's listening and they have the thought like, oh yeah, it's easy to say. What I have learned myself, because I was that person, I was like, well, everybody's talking about like fail, that's a lesson. And I'm like, I don't know. What I have learned and found like really valuable is that you won't understand this message until you actually go out there and you fail. And that's where you really start to get it. So like anything that we ever consume, unless we start to act on it, we won't really understand it. And it's not easy to do it. It's not comfortable to do it. But the only way to learn those lessons is really by failing. And you can't really understand that process until you go and you take those actions. And with that, I want to ask you, what are the things that can help somebody to start to take those actions? Because in my experience with myself and working with other people, what I have seen is that one of the biggest challenges isn't even dealing with the consequences of starting to do something, whether it's good or bad, but it's actually just starting it. So what are the things that could help people to start to take action?
So depending on what it is that they want to do, like I said, we like to advise them to start small.
Yeah.
So let's say let's say that you've actually wanted to learn a different language, and for whatever reason, you've held yourself back. So we suggest that you learn 5 phrases and you start practicing it from somebody who speaks that language, so that you're actually engaging with that person and they can correct you, and you start on the process. Or let's say you want to improve your cooking skills. So one of the things you can do is you can invite friends for dinner and try a new recipe. So there's an element of risk, but it's not earth-shattering. So once you learn to conquer these smaller things, or try a different sport that you've never tried before, yeah? You know, when you're starting out, anything, you suck at it, pretty much.
Yep.
Until, you know, you practice and then you get better at it. So learning how to deal with the whole process of starting something and not being good at it, but you like it, you know, it has to be something you want to do. You know, it can't be something that you go, oh my God, I can't do this, but I'm going to force myself. That's not the point. The point is to do something fun that you've been holding yourself back because you weren't quite sure how you'd handle it. So, I mean, you know, I've had participants come back to class and they tell us what they did. So one of them said she rode her bike after a year, she hadn't ridden it. And then she said she was so inspired, she went and did something else. So it builds on itself, you know, like the more action you take, the more you start to get excited, and, you know, there's fire under your bum, and then you start to doing, you know, you start to do other things. And this is essential to do on a regular basis. So, you know, if you, right, exactly. So, and if you can challenge yourself to do something new every month. So that's also, you know, this is an ongoing process. And before you know it, you have much more self-assurance, and you can start looking at bigger things like a move, for example, to another country, or another job in another industry, like, you know, whatever it might be. But yes, it has to be small baby steps. And then if you have a setback, you know, sit back and look at it and say, so how I approach the situation, could I have done something differently? What have I learned from this? It's always having this curiosity of mind, you know, approaching the world with curiosity, right? As opposed to beating yourself up and going, I'm no good, I knew I couldn't do it, but, you know, all that nonsense. So having the curiosity and openness to explore, because really life is about taking risks. Every time you open the door and walk out the door, you're taking a risk. Because, you know, you could have a truck come and hit you, but we don't think like that. We just live, right?
And even accepting that there is no one right choice, because I think a lot of times we want to be like, I want to make the right decision, I want to make the right choice. Especially, that's one thing that I have seen with a lot of young people. And I had a conversation with one lady recently about how when you're growing up, especially when you're like in your teenage years or like in your early 20s, people are like, okay, what you're going to study, what kind of career you're going to build, and you're still learning or trying to figure out yourself. You don't even know who you really are, but you get this pressure to know what exactly is it that you want to do or where you want to go. And I think it's important to embrace that and accept the fact that there is no right decision, but you can make decision and you can make it right. It's literally like your decision to make it right.
And then you can also change your mind.
Nothing
has to be permanent or you know, the end of the world.
You know what's because what you said, that's a really, really good and important point for people to take away. You actually can change your mind. You actually can change that decision. Do you know why people feel like they can't? Or maybe, oh, like I already made this decision, like I can't really kind of go back on it.
Some of it has to do with ego. So we don't want to admit that we were wrong, that we've made mistakes, that we screwed up. Because what are people going to think? They're going to look at me and think I'm an idiot, right? This kind of, you know, whereas the whole process of living is trying things out. So after I finished my undergraduate degree, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I ended up getting married, and then I tried 3 different types of learning, 3 different kinds of programs. And I didn't like any of them. So the first one was a master's in English literature, and I found it boring as hell. So I did the first course, I did well in it, but I dropped the program. The next one I tried was
what made it easy for you to drop it?
Well, I thought I did the one course and I thought, I'm not enjoying this. And it has no practical application to my life. Because once you get at the master's level, you're digging really deep. Like, should the poet have used this word or this other word? And I'm thinking, honestly, how is this helping the world? So it wasn't practical enough for me. And then I went into English as a second language because I was told, that would be really good. And I absolutely hated it so much that I couldn't even write the first exam. I dropped it like in the middle. So, that wasn't for me. And then I tried another program that was actually a therapy program that was mixed in with the Master's of Education. And after the first year, it didn't feel right. So I quit that too. So there was 3 things that I did, and I invested time and money and energy. And I remember my mother saying to me, why can't you ever finish anything? Why do you start all these things? I said, because I'm exploring what I want to do. And these are not it. So it wasn't until my 40s when I went back to school and I did a human resources program. That's when I found that was it. I dedicated six months of my life to it, and I graduated with distinction. And I absolutely loved it. It was a lot of hard work, but I found it. So, maybe if I hadn't tried those things, I wouldn't have known. But it's very important to also know what you don't want, not just what you do, but also what you don't. Right?
Really important. And even as you go through those courses, there's still some takeaways that you take with you that you can apply to whatever is the next thing you do. And that's something that I hear a lot. Is that people are like, and that's a lot with making decisions about, especially bigger decisions, like what career you go into or what do you study, where they feel like if they end up studying that, and you might even talk about your experience on this, is that they go through those years of studying it, and then they realize it's not my thing. It's not my direction. They feel like it was a waste of time.
Yes.
And that sense of waste of time, I think a lot of times, well, it can make you feel bad about yourself, but also it can affect the likelihood of you going into the next venture when you're like, what if this also is a waste of time? And you end up being like kind of not going anywhere because now everything is potentially going to be a waste of time.
Right. So that kind of primes you for not doing anything. But, the only way to get anywhere is by taking action. And sometimes it's action that doesn't get you to where you think you're going to get. But as you said, you always learn something from it. So from this last program that I mentioned to you about the therapy, I realized that I would make a very good therapist. And I've been told that throughout my life. And actually, when I went into human resource management and I worked on cruise ships, I used all of those skills, and it was true. And I'm a very good coach, and I did training. All of those skills came out in that particular course, but it wasn't the way I wanted to do it. So I took that and I applied it in another way. And sometimes life encourages you to take things and make something different. Something you were not expected, something that's not on the mainstream track, something that just shows up for you. This is how this business I'm doing now showed up for me. It was just kind of like this intuition that said to me, wow, there's all these women who have no support and nobody even thinks about them. But they're the ones who have so much hidden talent, and they're the ones who need to wake up. So boom, there we go. Now, if somebody in my 20s had told me I'd be doing this today, I would be like, how would I even get there? Like, it doesn't make logical sense, but it's just a journey, right? Like, if we could look at our lives more as a kind of adventurous journey than having to do certain things and being in a rut and having so much structure. We have so much structure. We're pushed into structure. I think people's lives would be a little bit more fluid, and they would allow themselves a little bit more mistakes and be more self-compassionate, right? So things don't always work out the way you want them to, but that's okay. You learn things, you lived, you experienced, right? I mean, I'm living in country number 13. So I didn't find the right country, right? That's a lot of countries. And I learned a lot of things. I met a lot of people. I had some amazing experiences. I mean, all of this, it's just life experience, and it's given me a richer existence. And it's also allowing me to connect to so many people. And I'm very good at forming bonds because I have learned how to adapt and how to get to know people from so many different cultures and so many different countries. So it's, in my mind, nothing is ever wasted. It's just how we choose to apply those things that we have learned. And we choose to actually learn lessons.
Yeah. Did you ever have that mindset of time wasted? Or was it always like, if you had, I would be really curious to know what helped you to kind of shift away from it.
I don't think I ever thought about the time wasted. What I thought more of was this fear of failure. You know, there was this fear of what if I do it wrong? What if, I mean, and it was really silly things I was trying. It was things like I wouldn't play a card game with people because I would, maybe what if I lost? I mean, it was just, it was so extreme.
I can
and
so relate.
Right? So you go, oh my gosh, really? I don't know, to be honest, what got me out of that. I think what ended up happening is just my life experience started to become richer and deeper. And I started doing more things and I started meeting more people and things just kind of broadened. And I found things in myself I didn't know. I didn't know I would be a good trainer. I didn't know I would be a good speaker, but I felt something inside working towards that. And so I followed that intuition. So when I started
it's
to
also
speak,
might be you becoming like more present as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the self-awareness, right? We were talking about that. My first business, I wanted to market myself through speaking and writing. And I knew that the speaking was very important, but I was like most people, I was really nervous. I was very self-conscious. I had all of these things in my head. So I went to a speech and presentation coach, and I invested time and effort in that. And that really paid off. And then of course I went into training and everything shifted. But this was a nugget inside my heart that was calling to me. So I followed that. And it's, you know, obviously it's changed the path of my life. So it's also listening to that little voice inside and being still enough to listen to it and say, no, I know this is what I'm being told I should be doing, but you know, this actually really calls to me.
Yeah. This reminds me of Surrender Experiment, which by the way, anybody listening, great book, check it out. Because and that's something that he's talking a lot about, and not even about what you're told you should be doing, but sometimes you have kind of in your mind the plan of what you want to do, where you want to go.
Yes.
But then that inner voice might be like, actually, this could be another thing that you could do. And we just tend to ignore signs that we're getting to make certain decisions. We're like, this is my thing. I have to do this. I have made decisions. Exactly. Which sometimes, and that's kind of like the balance where you have to find, where if you're somebody who is really driven and you're really ambitious, it feels like a sense of kind of showing weakness when you shift or you pivot, because like you're giving up or you're quitting. But
those are programs. Those are programs that we were taught. Yeah.
And so what helps to get in alignment with that like inner voice, which a lot of times if we sit down and we listen to it, sometimes what it says doesn't make sense. Okay, go this way. But what helps to listen to it and act on it when technically it doesn't really make sense to go that direction?
That's a very good question. Personally speaking, for me, it's been studying spirituality. I've been studying non-religious spirituality for 35 years. So I've read a lot of books like the Surrender Experiment. I've read a lot of books that talk about us as, you know, energy beings who have another existence and who just come here to incarnate into this life to have an experience. So when you start to look at your life in that way, it changes things. And one of the things that all of these books say is that your intuition is your guidance system. It's your inner GPS that you come here equipped with. It's just that most of us are so distracted and we're so in our ego that we don't listen to that inner voice. But we've all had experiences. Every single person has had experiences when their intuition said something and they listened and it was really good. And sometimes it saves your life. And then we've also had experiences where their intuition told them something and they didn't listen and it was disaster. So learning how to, you know, are you operating from ego? Are you operating from your heart where your intuition lives? These are things that, you know, again, it's a very personal thing. I know for me, sometimes my intuition is very strong and it's really against my rational mind. And I still struggle with that sometimes because, you know, we're human and we want things to make sense. But that's because we have a very small window we're looking through, whereas the universe is really, you know, you're looking at a multiverse. So for me, that was the big thing, was the whole spirituality thing. it guided me in that direction. And also because I did get very strong intuitions even when I was young. So I just somehow learned that just it was organic, right? For me, it was very natural to listen to that kind of thing. Plus, I always liked fantasy and science fiction. I always liked to look at broader things. For me, this kind of everyday reality was kind of boring. So, so I would look at, at these other opportunities. I loved Star Trek. I loved Star Wars. It opened up doors for me of possibilities because maybe these things do exist somewhere out there. So to listen to my heart and to my intuition wasn't such a far jump, right?
Yeah.
There's much more than the logical mind. And this is the thing that we're also trying to wake up to, is that there's much more than the logical mind.
Yeah, we live in a really logical world.
Yes. Very, very male-oriented, logical reason from, 1, 2, 3, whereas the female mind, the right brain, is much more artistic. It's much more intuitive. It kind of looks at things holistically. And so you could have an understanding of a situation that just kind of drops into your mind without the logical process. And yet it is absolutely true and accurate. And this is, our society doesn't really recognize that. You have other cultures that recognize that. So for example, the Maori people in Australia, they have things like dream time. So for them, that's equally important in their lives than just the logic. So they get messages from spirits and from the other world. That's how they live. Doesn't mean their lives are any worse. It doesn't mean that they're savages and we're civilized. It just means that they have a different tuning fork in how they live their existence. And to my mind, it makes a lot more sense to use both, right? So I like to use both, but if I have to choose, I will choose my intuition, because that's never led me wrong.
Yeah, and it's something that even about, let's say, when you talk to somebody or like you have a potential business deal and you feel like something is off, even though the deal looks like really good.
Yes.
And every time when you listen to that voice, for some reason, it's true. It knows. And
I'll give you a perfect example of that.
Okay.
I was approached by a woman on Facebook who was creating one of these book compilations. Have you seen them, where a bunch of women get together and they write a chapter in the book about a certain theme? So this was the first time I was ever approached. So this was a couple of years ago. And so I wanted to know more about her. I also wanted to do a Zoom call with her. I had questions. Well, I was never able to get her, right? I was never able to get her. There was always this vagueness. And something said, don't do it. So I said, no, you know what? I'm not going to do this. So I passed up on that. But somebody else I know went ahead. She was also approached. She went, and she told me that at the end, the book got published without the authors, like all the authors didn't have final say what their chapter said. So, that was completely unethical. And then she wouldn't respond to their messages. I mean, it was disaster. So I thought, wow, once again, I dodged a bullet because something didn't feel right. This is exactly what you said. Something didn't feel right. You don't have to know exactly what, but something doesn't feel right. Keep your distance. That's just how I work. Yeah.
I think it also actually acting on that does a lot with your confidence in yourself and trust in yourself as well. Because a lot of times we're like, well, it doesn't really feel right to do this, or something feels off, but it makes sense. And you kind of go with that instead of trusting yourself, which, well, you might even talk about the importance of building a relationship with yourself, because we hear a lot about relationship with others, leadership, things like that. But I don't think we hear enough about building a relationship with yourself. And there's really interesting, like, 2 years ago on a podcast, I had somebody, when I would explain him that there's difference between being by yourself and being with yourself.
Yes.
And not many people spend enough time with themselves. We're by ourselves, kind of killing time or whatever, which actually is us trying to escape ourselves. But maybe you can talk a bit more on building a relationship with yourself.
So where the self-awareness comes in, which is what, one of the major foundational things we talk about in our program. When we do the confidence course, we start to talk about self-awareness and what it is and why you need it, because many people just are on automatic pilot.
Yeah.
They just react to things. This is how they've always been. There's no thought to what's going to happen next. It's just how it is. So whenever you accept how it is as the only way of being, you've stopped growing because you're not questioning anything. Self-awareness of kind of like opens a door to something that says, I have this situation and how do I feel about it? And, the intuition part, right? Something's telling me this is not right. What do I do now? So it's becoming aware of how you respond to things. And it's a whole bodily thing too, right? It's becoming aware of your body sensations and what they're telling you, because your body's always talking to you. We're just not used to listening to it, right? It's like it's separate somehow, which is nonsense. So definitely cultivating self-awareness. And one of the exercises, for example, we have our participants do is we give them a list that we've come up with 100 different qualities. So we ask them to tick them off, and we tell them to do the exercise with somebody that knows you very well and who loves you and who's very supportive, because you are not going to see everything about yourself. But that person who loves you will see more about you than you do. And it's going to open your eyes because you're not going to realize. I went through this exercise with a friend, and I remember putting these things down, and she said, yeah, but you're also this and you're also this. And I said, really? She said, yeah. And, I wasn't able to see it.
Yeah.
So it's this whole thing about opening your eyes to who you truly are and leading with those strengths, leading with what you're really good at. So I'm not really good at mathematics, and I'm never gonna improve on that unless I spend a lot of time and money and effort. But I'm a really, I connect to people very easily. I can have conversations and I bond very quickly. So those are my strengths, and I'm a good speaker, and I can reach into people's hearts. And those are the strengths that I lead with. And, it doesn't make something else any better, and it doesn't make this any better. It's just different.
Yeah.
And if you bring your joy and your light to the world, that's when, things start to really change in your life, because you live your life differently and you see yourself in a different way. And self-awareness, like when something triggers you, that's when you really need to step back and say, what's going on here? Yeah. What is happening inside of me that is triggering me? Yeah. And that's why I said sometimes it's hard to do without somebody else by your side guiding you.
Yeah, because naturally we especially, and that's something that I have learned a lot myself, where now I actually love to be triggered, because now it's like a present you get. There's a new project for me to work on, and you kind of open it up and you see what is it that you need to work on. But in the beginning, it would be like, and that's something I think a lot of women have as well, is that you don't want to even put yourself in a situation where you could potentially be triggered, because again, you have to be perfect, you have to be this and that. But and also I wanted to add that exercise, it sounds really, really interesting. And I think when I was studying psychology in Latvia, we had similar exercise, and I love this kind of exercises. And one exercise that I loved to do years ago, I would read a book, and in there it was written that write people that you consider close and ask them a question: how do you see me, good and bad? And I remember one of my friends, she was like, well, what do you care about what people think about you? And I'm like, that's not the point for this exercise. The point is for me to see myself from different perspectives.
Yes.
And there you can see things that you wouldn't see, both good and bad. And I would get responses that I would never even consider. I remember one of my friends, it was like years ago, I think like 7-8 years ago, he wrote me, I see you as a leader. And I was literally thinking about it for at least 2 weeks, because that thought had never crossed my mind. And I was like, leader, me? No, but maybe. And then you start to get
opens, right?
Feedbacks, both good and bad, like which is pretty like obvious for most people that know me. One of my friends said, like, you need to learn to relax more or do just something for fun, because I would always be like working, studying, and productive. And I was like, and I remember I would read that and it would trigger me, even though I knew that it's true. But I didn't feel comfortable doing that because that's not my environment. So that was another
guilt, right?
Exactly. So that was another avenue for me to discover, okay, how do I relax and either do nothing or do something fun and not feel bad about it? Or did I now have to once I get back to work, I have to go like double, like work even harder. So there's really interesting things that we can learn about ourselves when we ask people that know us or
Absolutely.
if we consider close, but we have to be willing to be open to that response or that answer,
Yes.
which we might not like, but it's really
Yes.
helpful to get those answers.
Absolutely. Self-awareness, it also includes the views of others, because we don't live in a glass bubble,
Yeah.
right? We're always interacting with others. And it's important that we understand how we come across, because sometimes we have blind spots and we can't see them until somebody else points them out, hopefully in a loving and caring way. But that's a very important part of becoming self-aware. And also the trigger points are very important, because that shows something really deep that needs healing.
Yeah.
And sometimes until we heal those really deep things, we can't actually move forward because they're holding us back. So this is, it's a complex process where human beings are very complex, and there's no recipe to follow. Like everyone is an individual. And, even the course, the program that we do, they're guidelines. We encourage people to look at this material, to work with it. And it's not just over 12 weeks. This is a lifetime thing that you need to work through. You're always working on your confidence. You're always working on your courage. You're always working on, minimizing that self-critical voice, so that you can, at one point, it will become habit, where you become more self-assured and more confident, know your boundaries. You don't have issues with setting boundaries, but that takes time. And there's no, like growing a plant takes time. You can't rush it. It's just a process, the natural process. The key is to just the diligence and the discipline and the real desire to actually shift into that person that will just come across in a different way. This is all we're encouraging people, is to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like.
Yeah. So what role does patience play in this? And how does somebody who, let's say, they're so unhappy where they are, they want to have change, they want to have it today, they want to get out of that like bad place they are, what helps them to remind themselves to be patient and trust the process? Because a lot of times we want to, especially if we're in a place where we're like really unhappy with where we are, who we are, things like that, we want to get out of it like today. But as you said, it takes time to change, transform. It's not something that happens overnight. So what are the things that might help that person to stick with it long enough where they actually start to see change instead of like quitting or giving up?
Excuse me. One of the problems is that a lot of people wait until it's critical. So instead of looking at their lives, kind of at the point where it's not such a massive problem, where it's still a small problem, they wait and they wait because they're afraid to make the change. They're in their comfort zone. And then one day it just crashes on them. And they're like, I need to leave now. I need to do something now. And unfortunately, it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't work like that. Situations like we talked about, these ladies that we do the training with, once you start to see some changes in yourself, so if you follow the program and follow the guidance that we give and keep practicing these things, you're going to start to see small changes in yourself. For some people, it's a lot faster. I've had participants that have completely changed in 12 weeks. And they have told me that, I had one participant say to me, I don't recognize myself in a good way. She's like, I can't believe who I am today than I was, all those weeks ago. So that's a radical shift that some people are actually ready for. And we just ignite that. And they get the information and they get the understanding and they get the practices and they're like, boom, they skyrocket, right? Some other people, especially if they're more timid or if their personality is not very outgoing, it takes them longer. It takes them longer to gain that belief in themselves. But taking small action and then seeing small results in yourself is what you need to get motivated. So it's like when you're trying to lose weight, right? You can't lose 40 pounds overnight.
Yeah.
So it takes time, it takes discipline. But when you see that you're starting to move, that motivates you. And so, always keeping your eye kind of like on the prize, and then also get support, get people who believe in you. get people who want to help you, and also, reading the right stuff, watching the right videos, getting that information, and filling your mind with positive things, because we are bombarded with negativity from everywhere. All of the media is like the disasters and murders and all of this stuff. There's one website that I always tell my participants about. It's the goodnewsnetwork.org. And all they have is good news. And it might be little stories, but it's about human kindness. It's about human compassion. It's about people helping each other in situations, people helping animals. Everything is really like, you just smile when you read this stuff. So when you feed your mind with more positive things, you're also going to have a different way of looking at, when things don't go wrong and when things don't go right, you're going to approach it a little bit differently. But small incremental changes and seeing the results will definitely get you from A to Z slowly and surely. And everyone has their pace. So I really want to stress that people shouldn't be judging themselves about how quickly they're moving along. As long as there's some sort of forward momentum, as long as you can see some shifts in yourself, even if they're slow, that's the important part, because that means you're no longer standing still. It means that you've started the journey, and it really is a journey.
Yeah. And also, one thing is not to compare yourself to what you see online. Doesn't matter what it is when it comes to building business or developing yourself, because so many people, they tell that they transformed in a week, or they reached this income within this and this amount of time. It's really easy to kind of compare yourself to somebody else's highlight reel. And also one thing that has helped me a lot myself is that just focus on this day. Because a lot of times when we think about all the steps that we need to take, now you think about, right? I will have to do so much. But if you just focus on this day, which actually is the only day that matters, because the steps you take today, those are the ones that will get you to that result. But now we think about all the steps we need to take for the next months or years or however long, that we're like, I don't know if I can
too much, right? You get overwhelmed.
Yeah. But then when you start to focus on this day, it feels much more manageable, but also you get that sense of accomplishment just from finishing this day, the things that you had to do. And then they just start to add up, or your tolerance, where you can start to actually do more and you don't feel that overwhelmed because you're used to it. And that's even with baby steps. That's a huge thing that I get a lot of people tell me that, I want to pretty much losing weight or getting money, stuff like that. They want it today. And I tell them and New Year's resolutions are a huge example with this. People want to take huge steps day one. And first off, it's not sustainable because it's too big of a load for you, where it's too much out of what you're used to. But then when you start the day, and then when you start the baby steps, it feels like, well, I'm not really doing anything. But I'm like, if you look at the whole month, actually in that month, you get more done than you do in those few days before you quit with those huge steps. So many times we undervalue the power of taking small steps, and not only the small steps, but also the momentum that you build up. That's what the real power is, the momentum.
And also the other thing we encourage our participants is to celebrate small victories, because we also don't do that. We wait until the big one. No, you need to celebrate. If I do something well and I'm happy, I'm like, Ileana, you did a really good job on that. It can be just that small, just to acknowledge what you have done. It's a huge thing, because your brain hears everything that you're telling yourself. So why not tell it something positive? And that also gives you motivation to keep going. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but embarking on the journey and staying on it is the most important part. And some days you'll get more done than other days. Some days you're not going to get anything done, and that's okay. It's the big picture, because a lot of people get discouraged if they have a plan and they don't live to the plan, and the plan is not, so always be open to also changing gears, right? We were talking about pivoting, we were talking about changes. Sometimes things happen in life that invite you to make some drastic changes to what you wanted to do, and be ready for that, and be open to that.
And sometimes you might even see it as opportunity. Exactly
that, as opposed to just being stuck in, it has to be this way. It has to be this way. As far as self-growth and self-development and self-improvement, this is like, to me, it's a lifetime thing. You know, you never ever get there because there's no there.
Yep.
Right? It's just a continual expression of who you are.
Yeah.
And if you look at it like that, it takes a lot of the pressure off, because there really isn't anything to accomplish except to express yourself in your most empowered way that you possibly can, right? And live in that place, and also help others. To me, this is a huge thing. You know, I'm always wanting to be of service to others, because I feel that that's the way we can start to change the world. You know, if more of us started to think like that and behave like that, that's when you make really big changes in the world. If you're just sitting there and you're just concerned about me, and, you know, the selfies and the narcissistic world, it's not going to do anything except keep you in the same place. And it's going to make you miserable, because you're always going to find somebody more beautiful, somebody more accomplished, somebody thinner, somebody. It's just it's a very negative way of looking at life, as opposed to being, you know, in gratitude and thinking of how much you really have going for you. And that's something else we talk about, is gratitude. And fostering that, you know, gratitude journaling, and thinking about how fortunate we all are. And we are.
Yeah.
You know, we really are, but we often forget, because we get caught up in this, you know, the latest thing. And that's why I don't like consumerism. And I don't go on Instagram. I don't go on Twitter, because all it is, you know, it's this fierce competition. It's about the latest thing. And I'm not interested in that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it can get in your head so much that you have to get the latest phone, the latest this, the latest that. But I think it also, the more secure you become in yourself, the less those things affect you. And all you see is just somebody doing that, and you're like
exactly.
I don't need that, and I don't feel the need for that, because I have myself. And it's actually a really interesting question that I sometimes ask people, where, you know, like, we all have tendency to complain, like we're not happy where we are, we're not happy with this, that, we're our bosses, this and that, and a lot of times I would ask, or like, let's say you want to be somebody else or whatever. Oh, it's easier for them, or stuff like that. And or even sometimes I myself, I'm like, oh, like, I don't like this or that. But then I ask myself a question: would I want to be anybody else but me? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. But so many times we get so focused on what's outside of us that we forget what is it that we have within us, or how many reasons we have to love ourselves, or where we are, or what we have accomplished, or the person we have become, things we have overcome. That it's really easy to forget those things, that everything else outside of you seems much better to accomplish. Even like when it comes to fame, people, I think there was like a study where people would ask like students in their 20s, what do you want to achieve, or like what would bring you happiness? Fame and money. And then I think that was the longest research in history on happiness. And then when they were like in 70s, 80s, the response was like relationships. But this idea that fame, a lot of times people don't even think about what comes with that fame, that pressure, that dealing with everybody.
No privacy.
Sees, no privacy. That by itself is a huge thing. That people just, I want to be known. Okay. But once you're known, you're known. That's it. It's not like you're known for like a week and you enjoy it. So everybody. It was
interesting. It's interesting that you say that. I read an article about Ellen DeGeneres recently, and she did this valedictorian address to a graduating class. And she said exactly the same thing to them. She said, when I was young, I just wanted fame and fortune and money, and I wanted to be well known. And it was very important to me. That was success, because she was talking about the definition of success. She said, as I've aged and I've matured, I realized it's more about being my authentic self and living in a way that honors me and those around me, and that gives me peace of mind. It's like, it's not about the fame and money and everything else. So that's somebody who's matured, obviously, and has, because it's a phase, right? Everybody, I think a lot of people get dragged in by that fame and fortune thing, right? And it's just this glitter that has no substance. And eventually, hopefully, you kind of grow out of that and you get into a place where other things mean more, like things that are not going to go away. Nobody's going to take those away from you, because when you go to die, nobody's going to ask you how much money you had or what kind of car you drove or anything like that, right? It's what's going to matter is the relationships you had, the change you made in the world, and how you lived. Those are the things that are going to make the difference, right?
Yeah, and it's so easy to get distracted from that. And even what Ellen DeGeneres was saying that she understood, that's something that's accessible to everybody.
Yes.
It's not something that, oh, I don't have the money. You don't have to have the money to have or be that person. All you need
to live
do is
authentically. Exactly. And that's very hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's
also because they don't know who they are.
So how can somebody get to know who they are? Understand, probably awareness is one of
yes. And so one of the other exercises we have our participants do is talk about their needs and their wants, because your needs and wants are very particular to you. They're very important to you. And unless you know what those are, you don't even know where to set your boundaries, right? So part of realizing who you are is having that. And then the other thing about authenticity is lack of pretense. So you're not pretending to other people, be somebody that you're not. You're not competing with other people because you're not interested in that. You're just interested in living your life in the best possible way you can. And like I said, expressing yourself to the world in the best possible way. So I'll give you a funny example. When I worked in this Middle Eastern country where they were obsessed with stuff, I had an old Nokia phone, and this was like,
was it like material stuff?
Material stuff, very much, yeah. and one of my colleagues looked at my phone and he said to me, "Your phone just doesn't suit your image." And I started to laugh because that was such a funny thing to me. It was, well, it's working. Like, I really don't care. It absolutely didn't impact me whatsoever. But that's how most people think. They think about image. And, this is the thing about social media. We have to really remember that these are curated images. People show you certain parts of their lives that they want you to see. This is not necessarily how they actually live. And, this is well documented. So if you compare yourself to that, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're setting yourself up for depression. And that's also been documented, that especially young children who spend too much time on social media, after they spend too much time on there, they get depressed. They actually look at their life and they go, it's terrible, when it's really, when it's really not. So I think that your authenticity comes through how you express yourself in the world. And I also would like to say that it has to do with how you are of help to others, so that your world is not always revolving around me, myself, and I, but there's a component to your life that puts you out there, whether it's to work in a food bank, or whether it's to work at a charity, or whether it's to work with animals, or whatever it is, something that gives back to others. And there's a particular feeling that comes from doing things like that doesn't come from anything else. There's a fulfillment, and it really does fill your heart. And it does make you more genuine and authentic when you're interacting with people from a service kind of perspective. And when I say service, I don't mean you're a servant. No. I mean that you're actually giving back from your heart in an area that speaks to you, and that makes a big difference to you. So for me, it's women, and it's also children in the third world. I've been sponsoring them since 1997 because I don't have children, and that's the closest I'm ever going to get to having a child, and it makes a big difference to me. So these are things that matter to me, and I want to give, and it makes my life so much richer. And it does work with the authenticity. It makes me more real. It makes me more solid and genuine, and who I truly am. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. But question about that phone situation. Other people, let's say, there can be a person who, when they get that comment, they now start to feel bad about themselves. That I don't fit in, and this and that. Or the first is that the moment I'm home, I'm getting a new phone.
Right, exactly.
So what was it that helped you to kind of laugh it off, or not take it as seriously, or take it personally?
I've never been interested in material things. Like I really, of course I like nice things. Who doesn't like nice things? But I don't chase the latest thing.
Yeah.
I'm not the earliest adapter of something. I'll have a normal car. I don't need to be driving something really fancy. I'm not interested in showing off. I'm not interested in having a particular image. I am who I am. And
Yeah.
if you don't like that, okay. Nobody ever has everybody like them. There's always going to be people who are not going to like you, who are going to criticize you, who are going to do whatever. I'm not really interested in those people. I know who I am, and a phone is not going to change anything, to be honest. Of course, now I have a smartphone because we all have smartphones, but at the time they were just coming in and it was just not a thing for me. And none of those things, to be honest, really are.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to point out that when it comes to fancy things and people who have fancy things, there's also two different kinds of people, because there are people who they just want it for themselves. They love to have it. They want to have that image, but it's not to impress or because they feel they're forced to be that way. They just like it. Like even example is like there's a lot of women who like to dress up fancy and really beautiful and things like that. And I think it's important for people who have that, who do that, to think about whether you're doing it because you want to do it for yourself,
right?
Or do you feel like you're forced,
precisely,
that you have to be this way,
Precisely. Yeah, because there's a certain image that you have to show the world, because if they saw who you really are, you would be rejected.
Yeah.
It's always about
toxic.
Exactly. It's always about doing things because you want to, or because you've been conditioned to do it. That's the big difference.
Yeah, because that's something that I have seen a lot and heard a lot when people, well, it's kind of the money mindset. Oh, like because they have money, they're this and that, or they're trying to show off, which sometimes it's the case, but sometimes they're just people who just love new stuff. They just love that thing and they do it for themselves. And it's just something that I have heard some successful people talk about, or people are like, oh, you're this and that because like all the cars and things like that. But they just love cars, sometimes they even hide them so that they don't have to show it to everybody else because of those assumptions, because they just want it for themselves. I also wanted to touch a bit on the leadership, because in workplace, there's especially differences between like the woman leader and a man, and if there's a way how both can complement each other.
Yes, there definitely is. And unfortunately, women often have to choose, or they have felt they have to choose between being heard and being liked. For women to be liked, it's extremely important. Men don't think so much about that. If they have something to say, if they have to take a stand, they just do it. They don't think so much about, or is this person not going to like me if I say this, or if I make an unpopular decision, What I find is that women bring empathy to the table, because this has become a really big thing now in leadership, is empathy, whereas before it wasn't. Empathy and kind of like, all these companies say our people are our biggest asset, but they don't live it. It's just the thing that they say. So women leaders can bring this concern for the employees to a whole new level.
They actually care.
Exactly. And really talk to the employees and find out what it is that they want that would help them, because then they will be staying longer. They're going to become advocates of the company. They're going to talk about the organization outside and bring in other people. They become fans of the organization. So I think women have a different way of approaching if they allow themselves that. And if they don't feel that they have to behave like men to get ahead, which a lot of women have been told. And when they try that, they're actually penalized. It's a very interesting paradox that happens, because when women try to be strong and assertive like men, they're often called bitches or bossy, which you never hear about men. So there's these images that are held in again, in the subconscious about how a woman should be and how she should not be. And there's different words that we associate with the feminine and the masculine. And so if a woman behaves like a man, she's often judged in a way that a man is not judged. So these are big challenges.
what are those behaviors like a man? I understand it's being like more assertive. What else?
So being dominant, being forceful, taking a stand and not backing it down. And of course, there's different types of leadership, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole gamut of ways of leading. There's collaborative leaders, and there's tyrannical leaders, and then there's inclusive leaders. There's all sorts of different ways to lead. Personally, I think that women need to be assertive, but not aggressive.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between aggression and being assertive. But sometimes women make that mistake and they come across as aggressive as opposed to just being assertive. And being assertive just means that you are strong in what you're saying without being abrasive, and you're still approachable and you're still collaborative. So it's a mix of abilities that, some people have naturally and other people need to work on. There's also the whole art of persuasion. So this is a really big one, because it's much better if you can persuade your leadership team to your view than to push them into a particular direction because you're the boss, right? So I think women are very good at the art of persuasion also, if they're also strong within themselves and have the strength to be assertive without being pushy. And it's
and for that you also need like really good communication skills as well.
Absolutely. And you need to get your message across in a particular way, especially if most of your leadership team are men, because men and women do communicate in some different ways. So these are all skills that can be learned. But if you look at the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, she just recently resigned. And she says she wants to be remembered for her kindness. This is a different thing to say when you're in that position, right? And the Australian vice president actually said that she has brought empathy into the political arena to a whole new level, because she was that kind of leader. So, and it's okay, you can lead that way. So this is a very different way of doing it. When I talk about the women leaders in our program that I discuss, they all led from a service perspective. So they saw something needed to be fixed, and they just went ahead and did it. So for them, it was about making a change in the world that was so important that they forgot about all of these uncertainties and who's going to like me, who's not going to like me, blah, blah, blah. They just went and did what they had to do. And they were major, big things. And so that's also like a purpose-driven leadership, right? So I think organizations, if they have another purpose besides making money, that also really helps. So if they have social responsibility, if they have a cause that they're working towards, that also really helps, because it takes the focus isn't just on the bottom line, and it adds an extra dimension to what the organization can do. And it also motivates staff. It motivates staff to think that they're making a difference in the world in that particular way. But every company is different, every organization is different. And, some companies are much more political than others, which make it much more complicated to get the right people in the right roles. And then it's just, sometimes it really is not possible until there's a whole change of leadership team. Yeah.
This leadership is something that I find really interesting. Even when it comes to mental toughness, and that's kind of good example that I can use to kind of put the point across, is that a lot of times people associate mental toughness with somebody who's like really masculine, always like pushing through, things like that, which is not always the case. Some people that are the most resilient people, you would never even think that, oh, that person is like really resilient, because they don't look like that image.
Yes.
And I think it's the same with leadership, because people think that there's one image, the way the leader should be. But I think the best way is to kind of combine the two. Like one person that I had a call with some time ago, we just like doing networking call. And he said, like, you have really good combination. you're really straight up and you tell things as they are, but you also care.
Yes.
So having that balance of
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
only one or the other, but you find a way how to mingle them together where they actually complement each other, where it's not just, oh, you have to be only this or that. You actually can be both, and they both
Yes.
like complement each other.
Absolutely. And authentic.
Yeah.
Because people will know if you're putting on an act or if
Yeah.
you're being real. And that there's no substitute for that. You have to really be real,
Yeah.
because that's the only way to really connect with people on a deep level. And if you're the leader of an organization or a country or whatever, or a city or whatever, it's very important that they feel understood. I used to work, I told you I used to work on cruise ships. I was human resource manager, and I worked on one ship where there was this captain and he had 1,700 crew members, and he knew the name of every single person.
Wow.
And they rotated. Every 2 weeks or whatever, they would rotate. New people would come on, and he knew their name. That was huge. That was huge because he bonded with them in a particular way that nobody else had, because he thought they were important enough for him to know their name.
Yeah.
That's
and that as a result makes them feel important.
exactly. So they were very loyal to him, actually. So it's
Yeah.
small things like that makes people feel appreciated, and that they're not just a number and easily replaced. Because I think this is another problem that exists in a lot of companies and a lot of institutions, is that people feel they're easily replaced, that they are not valuable in and of themselves.
Yeah.
And this, of course, with women, it's even worse because they've already got that programming.
Yeah. And they sometimes might even, because of that programming, through their behaviors, kind of cause that to happen. Because it has nothing to do with their talents or their abilities.
Exactly.
But because we have this idea that, oh, I'm this and that, or I don't deserve this and that, we kind of adjust our actions.
We set it up
based on
for
that.
ourselves. Yeah. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Self-fulfilling prophecy. It can go either way. It can go in a positive way, or it can go in a negative way. Yes. And also there's a lot of self-victimization.
Yeah.
There's always this whole thing about, why is this happening to me? Why can't my life go right? Blah, 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 which really gets you nowhere. Like, it's just a downward spiral. So instead of thinking that way, it's much more useful to think about the lessons that are happening. What can I learn from this? Is there any nugget here that I can take out? And sometimes it takes time to think about it, and it doesn't come to you immediately, but eventually, in most situations, you will find something of value.
Or even starting to look at, okay, like all these reasons why this happens to me or this happens, we blame things outside of us, but we never are like, okay, what's my role in this happening? Because it's not comfortable to be like, actually, I might play a role in this, how I got to this place, even though it is external that might affect us, but we are playing a role in that.
Yes.
And that's something that taking that ownership for our decisions, our actions, it's not easy, but I think it's one of the main things to do if we want to have any change, because otherwise everything is to blame, but it's never us.
But ourselves.
Yeah.
The self-examination is very important, which is part of self-awareness, right?
Yeah. So what are the things that could be like good to examine in a self?
Very good questions. So depending on the situation that you're involved in, I think your reactions, how you react to certain things, and also how you view things. I think it's really important that you sit down and think about, do I see life as mostly negative, or do I see it as opportunities that are kind of like waiting in the wings? Because really, according to quantum physics, we're told that everything is potential. The whole universe is just potentialities that could come into reality. So how do I view myself in this place, in this world? Who am I? And what is it that I want to leave behind me? So I think, those kinds of questions, I mean, for some people, it's their children, the fact that they have children, that's their legacy. For other people, it might be something else. I want to write a book. I want to do I want to create a musical masterpiece. I want to open a school for orphan children. I want to do. So once we start to look at some of those things about ourselves, what would our dream be? And especially if the dream is bigger than us, right? Like it has a bigger impact than just, getting another car or something like that. That's when we start to get to know who we really are and what really is at the core, because I think every single person comes to this planet with something that they need to do. And figuring out what that is sometimes takes you your whole lifetime. But once you figure it out, it just really fires you up and it really does shift your entire life. And we're at different stages in our lives, right? You're a different stage than I am. And at this point, I have a lot more years behind me than I have in front of me. So the way I look at things is I have things I want to accomplish in the next few years, because at some point I'd like to retire. Although I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen. But it's different than when you're 30 and when you're looking ahead and you have the whole world is your oyster and you could go either way. The other thing is that our world is changing so rapidly. These days, our world it's really hard to keep up with everything. So that's why it's very important to have a really good core knowledge of who you are so that you don't get, sideswiped all the time. Because there's a lot of things that are happening very rapidly that could throw you off balance and become frightening and become overwhelming. So that's why it's really important to have that strong inner core of who you are and the knowledge that however things go, you'll figure it out.
So how do you get to that core of who I am, especially now when we get bombarded with all kinds of messages? So I think even finding time to do that discovery where we feel like we have to be online, we have to be up to date with everything. Like, what's even the process to finding who you are or getting to that core?
Well, personally, I don't watch TV. I don't watch the news. I told you, I don't go on Twitter. I don't go on Instagram. I have a Facebook group. So I'm on Facebook also to keep in touch with my friends. And I'm on LinkedIn because of business reasons. But I don't subject myself to all of those messages. I know what's going on in the world because it's impossible for us not to, right? And if it's something that's really difficult, if it's something that's very negative, I don't focus on it because I know what's happening, but unless I can take action and do something about it, unless I'm going to become an activist and do something about that particular problem, if I focus on it and put my attention on it, it's just going to grow in my mind. It's going to make things worse. And it's going to color my view of, how horrible this world really is, which truly it's not. We just don't get that balance, right? So I think first of all is to try and step back from all the messaging. Because the messaging that we get is not about finding ourselves and it's not about building that core. It's about confining us to a particular way of being and really controllable. The human mind is highly controllable, right? It's highly programmable. And most of the programming
and also you get really reactive.
Absolutely.
Message.
Exactly. And so it breaks your focus and concentration. Right? And, how, like you read a lot and you read things that interest you and help you grow and make you think about deep things. This is a very good practice, so always having that kind of thing to feed your mind with. And as you read more stuff and you explore more stuff in that arena, you start to realize who you are. You start to find that. You start to see what resonates with you. The other thing that I did for many years was take personality tests. For example, the MBTI, Myers-Briggs, is very accurate. That'll give you kind of like a profile of who you are. There's also the Enneagram. So these are all kind of like just facets. They just show you different sides of yourself. And that really helps to solidify that person. And don't forget that we just, we shift, we're always shifting. We're always learning as we gain more experience, as we gain more knowledge, we grow and evolve if we allow ourselves. And that's the thing. If we don't get we don't get trapped in the distractions. We don't get trapped in the messaging, in the competition, in the I want this and I want that. And constantly the consumerism. If we can pull ourselves out of that a little bit and try and look at life in a different way than just about acquiring things, that will start to shift how we see things. And then again, as I said before, about doing something for someone else. That is a huge thing to help you crystallize really that strong inner core of who you are.
Yeah. For people who maybe are not as disciplined as you with social media, one thing that I can suggest, and I'm practicing myself, is that just set a time that you're offline. So let's say in the morning,
exactly, limited.
Let's say even like first 30 minutes. You don't have to start big, because starting big, you won't sustain it. But even like first 30 minutes, you will see how much you're present, how much you're not in this like reactive state, which actually it's really addictive, because
it is.
When you really get in that phase, when you always reactive, you're always like available, it's really hard to let that go. Even myself, and I'm like quite disciplined in several things, I would be like, oh, I really want to check it. Like, I really want to do that. So what I did is that I started to turn where I don't see notifications. So what happens is, because you don't get them, you kind of forget about it. Then you're like, oh, I was supposed to get this message. Then you remember, and then you kind of check it. But it's really easy to forget about it. And it's actually much sooner than we think it is, when we actually put ourselves in that environment where right now I don't really check the phone intentionally, where I'm like, oh, like check the phone. And I have really like changed the way I use the phone, where I have only a few like communication apps on the phone that I know that if my clients need to reach me or my team needs to reach me, like they can reach me. But other than that, but it was like really hard decision to make.
And stick to it, right?
Even though it's like silly decision, seemingly. But because you're so much into that world, especially me as somebody who's kind of grew up with social media, it's something that, but at the same time, like once you make that decision, you get done so much more. You're so much more present. And being present is huge, because you get so much more done.
And focused. You're able to focus. You're not distracted constantly by something else.
And with distractions, you're also not as anxious.
Exactly.
Which is another thing, that when I would use less social media, I can now instantly, if I'm scrolling the phone too long, I start to feel like a bit of anxiety, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Enough. And that time gets less and less over time, where you just don't tolerate it anymore. But it takes time to kind of let it go and trust that like you're really not missing anything out. You'll be fine. And when you focus on things that you want to do, you're actually going to get further ahead. And with that, similar to you, like I'm about like impact and helping people, you actually end up achieving more of what you want to achieve. So that's something that it's
you get to live life as opposed to looking at it on a device, right?
And that's a big thing that I notice every single time when I go through this, that initially it's scary, you don't want to let it go, but then when you do, you're like, I'm present. I'm actually now noticing that I'm living life. I'm being here, which for people who are like under 30 years old, I think most of us, it can be a big challenge, because you grow up with that. And you don't even know, like, well, first off, you will never forget your phone because you're always on it. But also one thing that I noticed myself when I would meet people, let's say my age, they would always want to sit on the phone. And I'm like, we're here. Instead of you talking to somebody who's not even physically here, be present and have a conversation. You don't have to check the phone every few minutes to respond to somebody that isn't even here. But we have this sense that like, I have to respond now. But now you're not present with that person anymore, which is something that I see a lot, that communication skills, they're kind of, they're not easy to work with in the first place. But when we live in a society where like it's easier to resolve conflict over text than it is to talk it through, it can get
bad idea.
But it's easier. That's what it is.
It apparently is easier, but it's not really. It doesn't actually resolve anything. When people ghost, it's just
it feels easier.
You have no responsibility. You don't care about how the other person responds, which I think is actually a very bad thing. But I was just going to say that addiction to social media is a well-known phenomenon.
Oh yeah.
And I think especially for young people who have been born into it, it's very easy, because
a lot of
especially
them
the young
base their
mind.
self-esteem on how many likes they get and things like that, where if you don't get enough likes, now you don't feel like you're good enough.
Exactly.
It's a
Which
huge
is the
challenge.
opposite of how you really should be in the world, right? Like,
yeah. And actually you get the most likes by being your authentic self.
Right.
And or when
those
you care
things,
about it the least.
yes, exactly. And those things don't really matter so much. That's just not important. It's who you are and how you're manifesting in the world and the things that you're doing. Those are the things that are important, and how you treat other people.
Yeah, but we don't see it promoted enough.
I know.
Because and also it's harder than just posting a picture and getting likes. It actually takes work. It takes interaction with people. It takes conflicts, dealing with conflicts, and people that they don't think exactly like I do. But then when you go online, just get a like. Cool. Yes. Happy,
which is instant gratification, right? That's what we're so used to. And this is why a lot of people in my age group have a trouble with that, because they know that for something really valuable to happen, like I said, growing a plant, it's not going to happen like that. It takes time and patience and nurturing. And the same with relationships, right? You need to nurture your relationships. So they're not just going to magically happen.
Yeah.
But this is something that is very difficult in our society to get the message across, and social media is not helping, unfortunately.
Okay, so as we slowly close off, can you give some advice for somebody who, let's say, is a leader and they didn't really grow up with social media and they're now leading people who are younger generation? What are some things for them to keep in mind when they work with these people?
Yeah, so I think their biggest challenge will be to model how much better it is to live your life in reality than to live on your device, just what we were talking about. Because it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to model it. So if you're able to do that for not just for young people, but for anyone, and to set that standard, that's how you live authentically. And you show that example, and you show how much better it is, because it really is much better, right? There's nothing compared to it. You slowly start to make an impact into that fake world, because really that's what we're talking about. And also getting young people involved in causes. And, I know organizations sometimes do charity days, or they run special events where they raise money for a certain cause, that kind of thing, because as we said before, how that makes you feel, there's nothing else like it in the world. And that, can also be a high. So, that's a much more important and meaningful way to live than, by how many likes you have, which are so ephemeral, they'll go anytime. But making a difference in someone's life is something that nothing can take away from you, and that you have a place here and you can make a difference. And a lot of people don't know that they can make a difference. And until they actually get that opportunity and they can see the impact they can make, they're still living in that other, kind of make-believe world. So that would be my advice: to show by example, to lead by example, and deep authenticity, and get everybody involved in that kind of thing.
Which is great parenting advice as well.
Exactly. Instead of do as I say, do as I like, really model and parent that.
All right. Anything else you would want to add before we close off?
I think I just want to tell, especially women, to not be so afraid to be who they are, because every single person in this world is unique and special and has gifts to offer that we need, especially in the world that we live in now. So let your light shine brightly and get the help that you need to get there, whatever that help may be for you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you you're not resilient enough or not strong enough. Just strong people ask for help when needed. So don't be afraid.
Some people are able to be vulnerable.
Exactly. Have the courage and take some action, and you'll see how your life will shift.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you for coming. I feel like we could talk forever.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Astra. It's been a real pleasure.